Excuse me. Got 3 hours of sleep last night, then I woke up, couldn't get back to sleep for like another 4 hours or so. Went out, had breakfast, came back, got maybe 2-3 hours more sleep. I'm probably not at my best right now. Welcome back to the Movie Reviewers 100. My name is Scott. I do the videos, the reviews, on Thursdays. I wanted to talk about a couple of new movies this week that I just saw. One of which was Sully. It opened a couple of weeks ago, and as far as I know, it's topped the box office here in the United States. Not that that should be important to me in particular. But it's another film that's done quite well for its director, Clint Eastwood, whose last film, American Sniper, actually ended up being the highest-grossing movie of 2014, even though it didn't come out in Chicago until January of 2015. It just, kept making more and more money, kind of like Titanic or Avatar, but not quite as much, but still. Nicely done. Nicely done, Mr. Eastwood. Nicely done. Sully is his new movie. It is about Chelsey Sullenberger, who was the airline pilot that successfully made a water landing on the Hudson River, New York City, a few years back. He is played by Tom Hanks in the movie. His first officer is Jeff Skiles. He's played by Aaron Eckhart. The two of them basically are forced to make this water landing because a flock of birds collide with the aircraft just as they've taken off and go through the engines, and both engines malfunction, and they don't have enough power to get back to the LaGuardia Airport or any other airport for that matter. And they're descending too rapidly, so they land in the water. And what happened was afterwards, the flight crew evacuated the passengers out onto the wings of the plane as it floated in the river, while several rescue boats came along to collect them, and the flight crew and everyone on board. And finally, the plane sank in the water. And this happened in January, so it was very, very cold outside, and they needed to get everyone inside. A couple of passengers fell in the water. They were pulled out. Everyone lived. Everybody survived this, and there were some superficial injuries, but nothing serious. It was just an amazing thing. They called it Miracle on the Hudson, and so Clint Eastwood's made a film about it. Most of the narrative revolves around the hearing that takes place afterwards. There are airline officials, basically people with the FAA, I think, who interview both Sully and his first mate about what they did and what could they have done and could they have made it back to the airport, etc. That is sort of split between that and flashbacks to the actual event itself, which is shown like 3 different times from different points of view. That kind of reminded me of a movie that came out in the 90s called Fearless, a really excellent movie by Peter Weir, who did Dead Poets Society and The Truman Show and Witness. It was also about a plane crash, but the plane crash itself is shown in little bits throughout the course of the movie, and finally at the end of the movie they actually show the crash itself kind of from the perspective of the passengers, because the main character is a passenger on the jet. Jeff Bridges was the star of that movie. It's funny, this movie also seems like it ended kind of abruptly, like they had another scene that they were going to put on at the end, but they decided at the last minute not to. Laura Linney, who also was in a Clint Eastwood movie called Absolute Power in '97, she plays Sully's wife. But she only ever appears basically on the phone with him. She is at their house basically with their daughters, and you only ever see her basically in the house, in the kitchen, in the living room, talking on the phone with him. There's no scene of them actually getting together again once the hearing is over, because he and Sully and Skiles are basically staying in a hotel. They're sort of kept away from everyone, and they do a couple of interviews with the press. Katie Couric plays herself. She interviewed Sully, and she plays herself in the film, recreating that interview. So while they're talking on the phone, basically she and Sully are talking on the phone periodically throughout the movie. But the movie ends before he returns home and they get together again. And I just felt like that was something that would have been there if they decided not to end it a little bit sooner, which is actually a really good moment, actually. The movie ends on a really, really great note, but when it does happen, it just kind of like fades out suddenly, and the credits roll. I'm just like, oh, it looks like they kind of cut off a scene right there and just decided, you know, not to draw that moment out anymore. Anyway, so yeah, that was a pretty decent movie. Clint Eastwood is a real no-frills director. He doesn't do a lot of adventurous or experimental stuff stylistically. He just shoots the scene from whatever best angles that he comes up with, and you know, just really sort of is a, you know, down to business kind of filmmaker. The exact opposite of him is Oliver Stone. Oliver Stone is known for doing lots and lots of stylistic tricks in his movies, especially in the 90s. Between like Born on the 4th of July, which came out in 89, and Any Given Sunday in 99, he made a bunch of very, very experimental looking films, some of which were really big hits and were very, very popular. He, of course, is the director of The Doors and Natural Born Killers and JFK and Nixon. He's got a very, very, he had anyway, a very outrageous kind of like in-your-face style, switching between color and black and white, 35 millimeter, 16 millimeter, you know, video, and he has cameras going all over the place, crazy enough. Natural Born Killers is probably his most out-of-control movie. And he's settled down quite a bit. You know, it's been, you know, a number of years since those movies were made, and he's settled down to a more straightforward style. His new movie is called Snowden. It is, of course, about Edward Snowden, the NSA contractor who worked for the CIA and a couple other government agencies handling classified information and trying to make the covert ops more secure, you know, that kind of thing. But what he also discovered was that there are groups within the government that were bulk collecting data on American citizens, none of whom were suspected of doing anything wrong. The way they talked about it in the film is that they would basically make connections between people who were suspected of terrorist activity or anti-American activity, but then in the process of collecting their information, they also collected the information of the people who they reached out to communicate with, even if it was just making a cell phone call or a phone call or an email to somebody about something that was completely not criminal at all. They would, you know, then tabulate all that person's information. So they've collected tons and tons of info on Americans that, you know, weren't really doing anything wrong at all and weren't suspected of any crime, had no reason to be investigated. And when Edward Snowden found out about this, he didn't like it one bit, and so one day he basically collected as much information on these programs as he could fit into a tiny little drive, basically, and hid it somewhere on his person, and then walked out and publicized it, took it to a couple of journalists. They met in South Korea in a hotel, or no, I'm pretty sure it was Japan. I forget exactly. Sorry about that. I'm pretty sure it was South Korea, though. It was in Seoul in South Korea. A couple of journalists who are played by Zachary Quinto and Tom Wilkinson, and there's a documentarian who is played by who played Mark Wahlberg's mother in The Fighter. Darn it, she was like, she won the Oscar, I think, for that. I can't remember her name, sorry about that. Anyway, she is playing the documentarian who made Citizen 4, which is the documentary about Edward Snowden that won the Oscar for Best Documentary. There's a bunch of other recognizable actors in this movie, but mostly it's about him. It sort of has a similar structure to a Sully, in which point they go back and forth between two different timelines. The one where he's meeting the journalists in this hotel room, you know, they put all their cell phones basically in the microwave to prevent any signal transmission, and he just talks about what happened, and he introduces his programs and talks a little bit about, you know, what it was he found out, and wants to give the information to the journalists so they can get it out to the world so the American people knows that they're being watched. And I was looking forward to this movie. I'm sorry, the narrative is split between that and him basically joining the CIA in the first place and joining these classified programs. He was in the armed services, but he had a real problem. His bones and his legs were not strong enough to carry the heavy packs, and he got these hairline fractures in his legs, so the doctor said, no more armed services for you. You need to, find a desk job. But he's very great with computers, and so that worked out well for him in the end. He also meets Shailene Woodley, who plays his girlfriend, a girlfriend who is now living with him in Russia, because Edward Snowden can't leave Russia because his passport's been revoked. So yeah, split between those two storylines. We see, or the two timelines, I should say, where we see him basically moving from agency to agency and having ethical and moral issues with some of the things he's being asked to do, and finally saying, screw it, I'm just going to, gather all this information and get it to the hands of journalists so they can release it and the American people knows what's being done to them. So yeah, like I said, Oliver Stone had a really crazy style for a number of years, but he's really calmed down quite a bit. This is a much more straightforward movie. They're both pretty straightforward movies for the most part, stylistically. And they're both pretty decent, although I have to say, as much as I enjoyed seeing Snowden and found it actually quite suspenseful, it doesn't really compare to the John Oliver interview. John Oliver, of course, is the host of an HBO news program, or comedy program, I should say, that deals with news issues called Last Week Tonight, and he actually went to Russia and conducted an interview with Edward Snowden and managed to make it back to the United States and broadcast it. It's a great interview. It's really terrific, and I'll leave the link to that in the description below if you'd like to see it. So yeah, I wouldn't say that the movie with Joseph Gordon-Levitt playing Edward Snowden is more entertaining than that, but it's still a pretty decent movie. They're both really decent movies. I have no reservations about recommending either of them. Obviously, there's the documentary Citizen 4. Obviously, there's probably lots of interview footage with Sully, the airline pilot. There's all these resources that you have to learn about these guys, aside from these dramatized movies, but they're still really decent movies, and so I got no issues with recommending both of them. So those are my two reviews for this week. They sort of have the similar theme, and we've got a new theme coming up for a director whose career has dated back to like the late 70s. This was actually a viewer request. We hope that have that for you very soon. And though I've been the only guy in the channel posting the last few weeks, I'm hoping that some of the other guys who are part of the channel will join me for that. We'll see. So thank you very much for watching, and please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. And the link to our Facebook page is below if you'd like to suggest any actors, actresses, directors, genres, what have you, for us to cover in the future. Thanks very much for watching. We'll see you again real soon. Bye-bye.